what exactly happened in Flint that, you mentioned that you were a whistleblower. I want you to, as a scientist and one of the main people investigating, how bad was the problem really?
For 7 years, some of these kids have been told by their parents, their teachers, the media, the clergy that they have suffered a horrific lead exposure that has damaged their brains and they will never recover. And you would expect that this would really mess up their lives.
So the media basically, blew up this fact that, hey, all the kids in Flint are brain damaged, but from you guys' data, that just simply wasn't true, right?
During the worst part of the water crisis, Flint kids, the number with concerning levels of blood only rose up to the average for the rest of the state of Michigan. It was always less than half of the blood lead of Flint in Detroit, right nearby. No one's telling Detroit kids they were brain damaged, even though they were always twice as bad. But such is the power of money and narratives in modern America. Once that story gets out, you just can't change it. And I think it's going to take decades, if ever, before people realize the harm that was potentially done by this false narrative.
In science, discovering the truth is supposed to be the goal. But for Dr. Marc Edwards, revealing the truth about toxic drinking water in D.C. and Flint made him a target. This episode isn't just about two water crises. It's about what happens when science collides with power. Hello, listeners, and welcome to H2O and Beyond. My name is Alex Hahn, and each week we dive into the science, systems, and stories behind the water we use every day. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Marc Edwards, a professor at Virginia Tech, and he was also named on Time's in the 2016 Time 100 for his role in helping to expose the Flint water crisis. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Edwards. It's great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
So before we get started, I usually like to ask my guests, can you give us a short introduction about who you are, what you do, and the place you work at?
Well, I'm Marc Edwards. I'm a professor of environmental engineering at Virginia Tech in lovely Blacksburg, Virginia.
And, I want to ask, how'd you get into this line of work?
Well, it started out by having a very intense interest in science since high school and then failing at everything I tried, but in a way that was educational. And ultimately learning about Love Canal because I went to the State University of New York at Buffalo. And at that time, Love Canal was just coming into the news. And of course, for those of you who aren't familiar, that was a case where they had a huge hazardous waste site and built an elementary school on top of it. And parents and kids figured out that they were getting sick and marched, and ultimately it led to the creation of Superfund in the United States. And it was really one of the key moments of the environmental movement. And when I heard environmental engineers were cleaning that up, I thought, oh, I want to be an environmental engineer without ever having had a class in engineering. So went and got a PhD in that at the University of Washington in Seattle, and it's been great ever since.
So did much of your early work already, sort of migrate towards pollution control and removing contaminants from water?
Yeah, I think most environmental engineers have an altruistic mindset of protecting humans from the environment, or as some of my students say, environmental engineers are saving humankind from itself, because we started out cleaning up, human sewage and garbage and things like that, and it progressed to other contaminants. And so, yeah, I was able to fulfill my dream of trying to control pollution and improve human health.
Yeah, and I think a lot of other fields of engineering focus on, creating like consumer products, say, but I think environmental engineers really focus on making the world a better place for all.
Right. And again, if you start with human sewage, you're starting out cleaning up something that's very important that caused all kinds of epidemics and waterborne disease and used to wipe out percentages of the population of Europe before we cleaned the water up. And so, uh, but it's basically humankind choking on its own excrement and killing itself. So yeah, that's where we started, and it went many interesting places thereafter.
See, yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think this brings us up to a great starting point. So, Dr. Edwards, a lot of our listeners may know you from your role in Flint, but I know your story goes all the way back to what happened in DC. Could you walk us through what exactly happened there and how the crisis there started?
Sure, it started out with me as a 40-year-old, very naive engineering professor who was hired by the EPA to fix what I thought was a routine problem with lead in water in the nation's capital. And I went there and I started asking questions, and I started getting this thought, crazy as it seemed, that the agencies weren't working in the best interest of the public, that there was more to this story. And a lot of my questions weren't getting answered, and I kept asking, and soon I was no longer working with the EPA. And so at that point, you kind of have a decision to either kind of crawl away into the corner and tell students a story about how maybe something bad was happening, I just didn't know, or you can fight. And in my case, I chose to push the issue and start studying it myself. And what I was able to show after 7 years and spending over $1 million of my own money is that, number one, the agencies knew about exposing the residents of Washington, D.C. to high lead in water for more than 4 years before they were caught by citizens in the Washington Post. That during that time, there were 3 whistleblowers within the agency who tried to alert the public that they were being exposed to the world's best known neurotoxin and were most certainly getting harmed, and the agencies were breaking the law. And those whistleblowers, I learned, were fired. And ultimately, when we got congressional hearings that proved what I learned, which is the agencies, the environmental policemen that we pay to protect us, had become environmental criminals. Um, yeah, that was some vindication, but that was in 2010, which was about 7 years after the exposure occurred. And we showed thousands of kids were lead poisoned. There were families destroyed. There were children not born from miscarriages and fetal death. And unfortunately, none of the perpetrators of that were held accountable. The whistleblowers were fired. All the lying criminals kept their jobs. Many agencies were involved in this, including the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, that fabricated scientific reports along with the EPA. And I thought it was a moment the agencies could reform. And unfortunately, the lesson they learned is they could really get away with anything. So if you don't learn from your mistakes, you're doomed to repeat them. So I knew in 2010 that another DC was going to happen. And I toured the country and warned people that it was, and people laughed at me and said I was a Chicken Little. But when Flint happened, that was it. I mean, it was exactly what I knew was inevitable. And this time we were ready to expose it in real time.
So you basically traveled around America to like all these different cities. Were there like specific ones that you chose to go to, or?
It was mainly to professional conferences, warning the agencies that if they didn't get their act together, they were going to betray the public again and lose public trust. Colleagues laughing at me, other engineering professors saying I should keep my mouth shut because I'm making us look bad, and me going, well, we're in this profession to protect the public welfare. That's our first and foremost mission statement. And it seems, unfortunately, we forgot that, along with other important truths like science is about seeking and speaking truth when it's inconvenient to do. So that was the prelude to Flint and uh, what happened thereafter.
And I heard at one point you even testified against Congress in about the case in DC. Is that correct?
Yeah, I testified to Congress 3 times about the Washington D.C. lead crisis, and about 3 times about the Flint water crisis as well. And so those were investigations and oversight committees where they're trying to hold the agencies accountable because they're all government agencies. There's no private industry that caused this. That's the other thing that people can't wrap their heads around. Why would government science agencies betray the public, poison them? How did their policemen turn into environmental criminals? But yeah, so that was one of the interesting things about DC and Flint is that the scientists involved were so bad they made politicians look good by comparison.
And what do you mean by these scientists were so bad? Did they, did they fabricate their data? What exactly did they do?
They broke the law, they fabricated data, they fired whistleblowers, uh, they denied reality, they lied. Uh, it's just horrible. You can't have a civilization when your trusted institutions are behaving in this way. And unfortunately, this is just another example of how trust in institutions was lost. So when I got into the field, Americans rightly trusted the safety of the government supplied water that came out of their tap. Why wouldn't they? Right.
Yeah, they had no reason back then. Yeah.
But after, the betrayals of Washington, D.C. and Flint, many Americans don't trust the water and never will. And we're paying a horrible cost for that betrayal in terms of poorest Americans spending their precious financial resources on bottled water and filters. We're unable to get to sell the idea we need to upgrade our infrastructure so we don't have to worry about lead in water anymore. Uh, the simplest solution is to replace the lead plumbing materials, but once that betrayal occurred, we have an every person for themselves mentality where it's like, oh, I can't trust the water anyway. I got to buy a filter. Why should I pay you to replace your lead pipes when I'm not going to trust it anyway?
And here in schools in America, we're taught that nobody's above the law. How could the EPA and other government agencies somehow get away with this?
Well, we don't have a means of holding them accountable. So you might note the struggles we have with community policing, where for years you heard stories about police abuse in communities. And it wasn't until you had cameras that people started to realize, wow, this is a real problem. Now, what do we do about it? And so society is currently struggling with that very issue. But no one ever expected that the environmental policemen at these government agencies, at your local water utility, a system we set up where there's no profit motive to lie. The only thing we expect is that they will do their jobs and tell us if there's a problem, right? No one had anticipated that they would do what they did. And so, what do you do when the environmental policemen are criminals? You know, I mean, people just go, I don't know. What do you do? Well, we're learning. You learn not to trust the drinking water, even though it's only a small fraction of water utilities that betrayed the public trust. Once you've had a high profile example like Flint, even if your local water utility is very trustworthy in doing their job, it's hard to convince people that they're not living the next Flint, you know? So this is a problem that society is facing, and I'm sad to say it's also come to science. We've seen trust in American institutions, whether it's politics, journalism, uh, every institution is trust is plummeting, and unfortunately, drinking water is there. And we've arrived at a day where too many Americans cannot trust the safety of their government-supplied drinking water that comes out of their tap, and that's a sad, sad commentary.
And I mean, I've done some of my own research, and apparently, tap water is held to stricter standards than bottled water these days, right?
It's a horrible problem, yeah. The amount of money we're spending on bottled water and filters, if we only could invest that in improving the centralized treatment that cost effectively and sustainably could deliver very safe drinking water to taps, we could do that. But once you've lost that idea of a common good and the trust in the people supplying the water, it's hard to earn that trust back and to get that ideal back.
Yeah, and I think for many of our listeners, DC's a lot less, familiar to them than what happened in Flint. Why do you think that is?
It's because the scientists betrayed the trust, lied to get themselves out of trouble, and unfortunately, lying works in this country. People should have been fired that perpetrated this crime. People should have gone to jail. The agency should have reformed. None of that happened. So, why is it that agencies are unaccountable and people lie? Well, it's because we let them and they get away with it, you know? So, that's a case where lying worked, unfortunately. If you want to talk about a bigger problem with our present day society, that is the problem. We don't hold liars accountable. We too frequently punish people who tell inconvenient truths. So if that's how you run your society, why are you surprised when things are screwed up?
They tried to stop you from investigating too, right? You initially had funds from the EPA to investigate this issue, but then I think, did they withdraw the funds or?
Yeah, they took away my funding, and yeah, like I said, most people, sane people, would have just gone away. And but I mortgaged my house and spent a lot of money to prove my worst fears were true. Unfortunately, and the worst fears of many DC parents and moms were true, and that was that a lot of people got hurt by this agency misconduct in Washington, D.C. It's absolutely 30 times worse in terms of health impacts than the Flint water crisis. In terms of number of people affected, the duration of the exposure, the amount of lead in water, but you never hear about it because they lied and got away with it. Whereas in Flint, it was just sort of the opposite problem. Maybe people overreacted to that a little bit, but history will be the judge, I guess.
And what made you choose the harder path? Like you said before, the easy way would have just have been, shut up and, just walk away from the problem. But you decided to spend so much of your own money. Why is that?
Because as a scientist, seeing other trusted scientists and engineers betray the public trust, that's a sacrilege. It undermines the very fabric of science. If we are not trustworthy or more trustworthy than other institutions, then why should people trust us? And so that's where we are. We've got a crisis of trust in scientists because, frankly, too many engineers and scientists aren't deserving of the public trust. It might be a small number, but it's enough so that many people question whether we are willing to pay the price to tell the truth when it's inconvenient, to blow the whistle when there are misconduct with our colleagues. And I think part of the problem is, again, that speaking the truth about these issues is very much punished. It's viewed as disloyalty to your friends and institutions. And I guess when I won the inaugural MIT Disobedience Award, which is really cool, it was a cool thing. You get an award for being disobedient, but I told them that if you ever want to live hell on earth, expose wrongdoing by your friends and institutions, and then be proven right, and you will be punished. I guarantee that.
And, were you punished in any way for doing all this whistleblowing?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Whistleblowing, almost by definition, it's appreciated by the people you help, but you're going to be hated by the people who you are exposing as wrongdoing. No one likes it when no one's going to thank you for exposing their
Yeah.
misconduct or lies, right? Uh, in science, you would hope we would. Scientists is supposed to be a profession full of humility where we're always trying to prove ourselves wrong. And if you make a mistake and someone points it out, you should thank them and try not to make that mistake again and get it corrected. But human nature being what it is, we just don't have the discipline and amongst modern scientists now to do that. We're all too human and trying to cover our mistakes up and again retaliating against people who we should be thanking for doing the right thing.
So what I'm hearing is you think that scientists, have a more obligation to, build their own credibility and serve the public at the same time, right?
Yeah, I mean, science was supposed to be the tribe of people who sought to uphold truth above all other loyalties, right? regardless of personal cost or prior bias. What is science? It's about humility and knowing that your brain's always trying to trick you and trying to overcome bias with empirical data. And once you have that, you have improved knowledge that you can use to make better decisions, right? So we were supposed to be the group of people that upheld truth as its highest loyalty. And too frequently, that's not the case nowadays.
What exactly happened in Flint that, you just mentioned that you were a whistleblower. I want you to, as a scientist and one of the main people investigating, how bad was the problem really?
Well, it was a horrible betrayal of the law. Once again, the government agencies involved entrusted with providing safe water, knew that there was a problem, knew that what they were doing was illegal, and rather than admit it and get it fixed, they covered it up. And so I had a friend within EPA, who was the foremost expert on the lead and copper in the world, and he, like me and other people, uh, knew that something like Flint was going to happen again because the agencies did not learn from the lesson in DC. So he tipped me off that this was happening, and I started working with Flint parents, and together we and many, many others exposed this environmental crime, and it was an environmental crime. The lead was high throughout the city, the law was being broken, and the agencies were breaking the law and lying about it. So that's horrible. The good news, you would think, is that we stopped the problem before children's blood lead got elevated to the point that there would be permanent damage. It should have been a success story. There's no doubt that some children had their blood elevated above levels of concern, but it was portrayed as if every single child in Flint was permanently brain damaged by what happened, and that's a false and potentially harmful statement as well. So after the residents and my friends and I exposed this problem, President Obama declared a federal emergency, and there was also, we showed there were deaths from Legionnaire's disease as well. So it wasn't just about lead. So, this was horrible. But once the federal emergency was announced, and literally billions of dollars in relief were potentially available to Flint through class action lawsuits and other things. So just imagine what the possibility of billions of dollars uh, being dangled in front of the poorest city in America can do to people. It's quite remarkable to see. So there became a financial incentive to exaggerate the harm done and how bad the situation was. And understandably, people wanted to get money to both address the health harm, but also people like to get money. And it wasn't just Flint residents, by the way. It was scientists working out of greed, going to Flint, fabricating reports, exaggerating what happened for their own self-aggrandizement and get their name in the paper. And so it became a huge, once the crime was exposed and the harm was stopped, it tended to become exaggerated, whereas in DC it was downplayed. So you got a dichotomy, like the worst modern water crisis in U.S. history, no one even knows about it, Washington D.C., and a real water crisis in Flint, Michigan, that arose from a betrayal of trust. But the health harm that was done in terms of the lead has been frankly exaggerated, and that's in itself harmful potentially, because many of these kids have been told for 7-8 years that they're permanently brain damaged and can't learn. And if you believe that, you will suffer the consequences of that. And many teachers believe that as well. And we've shown many teachers believe that their children can't learn. So this is, I know some people are doing this out of good intention to raise money to help Flint kids, but it's possible the harm being done from the story is greater than the money that they will ever raise out of good intentions. So this is called the nocebo effect. And yeah, when we pointed this out, it wasn't received very well by some people who really wanted the money and believe in the narrative that this is the worst. Their kids are all permanently brain damaged and can't learn.
So the media basically, blew up this fact that, hey, all the kids in Flint are brain damaged, but from you guys' data, that just simply wasn't true, right?
Not just us. Any rational analysis of the data shows that. We showed that during the water crisis, the effect was to raise the blood lead of Flint kids to the average for the rest of the state of Michigan. So I'll just repeat that. Like during the worst part of the water crisis, Flint kids, the number with concerning levels of blood only rose up to the average for the rest of the state of Michigan. It was always less than half of the blood lead of Flint in Detroit, right nearby. No one's telling Detroit kids they were brain damaged, even though they were always twice as bad, but such is the power of money and narratives in modern America. Once that story gets out, you just can't change it. And I think it's going to take decades, if ever, before people realize the harm that was potentially done by this false narrative.
And what, like, you talk about like these kids believing their brain, like, if you tell them they're brain damaged, basically they'll believe it. But how exactly does that harm the children per se?
Well, there's a very famous study that is called the Monster Study. And it goes back about to 1940s Iowa, where there was a professor who stuttered. And he wanted to do a human experiment to see. The theory was that if people told you when you were young that you had problems speaking, that your brain would take that information in and it would make you a stutterer. So incredibly, he went to an orphanage nearby and got a bunch of kids and divided them into groups. And one group of kids was perfectly normal speakers. And he and his colleagues lied to them. And whenever they spoke, they told them, "You're having problems speaking. You are a stutterer," right? This messed with the kids' heads so badly that many of them had lifelong speaking problems as a result of that. So this is the basis for something called the nocebo effect. You're familiar with the placebo effect, where if someone tells you they're helping you by giving you a sugar pill or doing anything, you really will be helped. It's not your imagination. Like, because you feel better, your body responds in a way where your health will improve. It's a real effect. So too, a nocebo effect is that you tell people, I harmed you, or you have a problem, to the point they believe it. And once they start believing it, they will start be manifested with the symptoms of that. Anyway, this experiment in Iowa was viewed as such a horror that in 1990, when it was exposed, there was a big lawsuit, and the kids that were lied to in this way got, about $1 million, because it's obviously completely unethical, right? You can't even study this in the university, by the way. It's such a powerful effect. Can you imagine going, "Oh, I'm going to go to a poor city in America and tell kids they're brain damaged, and I'm going to get some money, and with that money, I'm going to, in the end, do more harm than good"? People would just like, "What are you talking about?" That is so unethical, right? But, we've sort of seen that play out in public, um, in a sort of natural experiment. And yeah, I've met some of the kids in Flint, and a few of them really believed that they were permanently damaged for life and will never learn, and they are living their lives accordingly. And I think it's a travesty. I think they deserve to know the truth about what happened. But anyway, it's once you have such a narrative as that, which we have about the Flint water crisis, good luck getting the truth out. It's not going to happen easily. I'll tell you that much.
And this especially affects the kids, because I know as a kid your brain's more susceptible to being molded. You're more open-minded. You believe basically anything.
For 7 years, some of these kids have been told by their parents their teachers, the media, the clergy, that they have suffered a horrific lead exposure that has damaged their brains and they will never recover. And you would expect that this would really mess up their lives. And I think what's happened is wrong. I know sort of how and why it happened, um, but we have to get beyond that, I think, at some point and tell these kids the truth. And but it's too many people have too much at stake, unfortunately.
And you know, have you guys? I mean, you mentioned that it's like one day these kids should know the truth, but I mean, hasn't the truth already been like published by your papers?
Yeah, but without amplification in the media, and other scientists admitting what was happening is wrong, uh, publishing a paper is not going to counter this incredible international and national media sensation that's gone on for now almost a decade, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess yeah, most kids aren't reading like research papers at that age. Most parents, yeah, no, most people aren't reading those anyways. So
Yeah, yeah, and especially there's a lot of people who don't want this to be known, but they have a lot of financial stakes in continuing the false narrative. Yeah.
and I want to go back to a statement you made earlier. It's that some of the scientists were lying. What's the incentive for scientists lying? Are they getting paid to lie, or are they getting paid to lie on their research? Or
There's a variety of reasons. All of them are unscientific, by the way, so I hesitate to even call them scientists. But you know, funding. I've seen scientists fabricate data and credentials in order to get funding, in order to get papers, in order to get their name in the paper, in order to portray themselves as some kind of savior, telling people what they want to hear. Um, yeah, so this is a real problem that we're having, not just in my area of science, but you might know that many people have looked at the quality of science that's been done over the last few decades, and a lot of science is not reproducible. Cases of scientific misconduct aren't, we don't have a system really for handling that. And again, that goes back to like, well, what do you do when someone who's supposed to be a truth speaker doesn't uphold those principles, right? We never come up with a good system to adjudicate scientific disagreements and punish wrongdoers. Instead, we have kind of a code of silence wherein if you point out that other scientists are misbehaving, that they're going to turn on you again. You are the problem. But yeah, this is something that's always been there in science because it's human nature, and science is a human enterprise. But there are times when scientists better uphold and aspire to the scientific ideal, and there are times when we become more like used car salesmen, and unfortunately, proverbially used car salesmen. There's many honest ones, but yeah, we're seeing a backlash against science across the country, and in fact, across the world.
and there were organizations like the EPA and the government that tried to discredit you, and colleagues have accused with being obsessed with money and fame. How did this affect you, and how did you deal with it?
Well, it's just not true, frankly. Speaking out is costly. You're going to lose your research grants, you're going to lose your friends. I didn't lose my job, I didn't lose my family, but other people have gone this path too. So, I think I know that I did the right things for the
Mhm.
right reason. Sometimes I received more awards than I can imagine. Some other times I got more hate than you you can imagine. So it is what it is. It's you're always guaranteed that some people will appreciate the truth, especially if it's works to their advantage. But other people are going to be angry about it when it works to their disadvantage. And I wish humans didn't operate that way, but that's just a fact.
And something that my biology teacher just told me a few days ago. It's like he said that about it's like all this money gets poured into research, and all this money from funding, But a lot of these experiments, like the 99% of the experiments fail, and like maybe only like 1% actually produce like good results. And do you think the way that these scientists have behaved will sort of affect this flow of funding?
Oh my gosh, yeah, we're living through it right now. So yeah, you have a good science teacher who's very perceptive. He knows about the power of science, but also the dangers of politicized science and sloppy science. And yeah, there's many famous studies that have recently done that have been shown, even in medical science or biological science, where they tried to reproduce, so let's say, 100 very, very important results, um, and they could only reproduce half of them. Only half of published peer-reviewed data appears to be true. Well, at that point, what do you got? I could flip a coin and get a 50% accuracy rate, right? So it's a problem when only half of scientific reports in some fields are reproducible. And that's partly because we reward quantity and not quality. When I was a student, being right meant a lot. You were careful. You double checked. You triple checked. You had other people check. You would be ashamed if you were wrong. Uh, in more recent years, there's been such an emphasis on getting money and more papers and more results that people have slackened in their dedication to quality to get quantity. And that's very, very dangerous. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a trade-off. And I wrote a paper on that that's actually quite famous that talks about perverse incentives in science and how this shift from quality to quantity has gone too far, and we're all going to pay a price for it. We need to start rewarding people who are right. We need to start rewarding people who don't produce as many papers, but the ones that they do produce are true and accurate. Unfortunately, that's also going to take time because people are obsessed by numbers right now.
Does this have something to do? I think I know a little bit about what you're talking about. Every scientist is assigned like it's a sort of number based on the amount of publications and how many times it's been cited, right? I forgot what that number was called.
Yeah, this is just insanity. But, when I was a student, people knew who was doing quality work and they were respected. In more recent years, we came up with all these different counts. How many papers do you have? How many times are you cited? The more numbers you have, you win the game. Well, once we got that system, people started realizing only quantity is being rewarded. There's no reward for quality. And then there's other ways in which we humans respond to a system, and they start changing how they do things to inflate their numbers. There's a basic law of economics here that's at play. It's called Goodhart's law. It says once a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be useful. Why is that? Because people would cheat to get the numbers. So anyway, yeah, I mean, we started out like, oh, let's go to these quantitative metrics to rank professors, to tune who gets money, who gets rewards. Yeah, once we did that, people responded, and yeah, you got quantity, but you sure lost the quality. And so that's all you got to do is change the reward system, and people will respond in ways that are sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I think, unfortunately, we're responding in a bad way.
And I think does this have something to do with like, it's so much harder to receive funding if the amount of publications you start out with is
But
low, right? And it sort of rewards
it's a
those.
hyper
Yeah.
competition. You won't even get a job if you don't have enough papers. You're not even in the game if you don't hit the quantity numbers, right? So from the very start, students are shown what the game is about, and I think it's a dangerous game. If you don't have enough papers, you won't get hired. If you don't have enough papers after you're hired, you won't get funding. If you don't keep hitting these numbers, you're not going to win. So at each stage of that process, people who value quality above all else are weeded out, or they see that the game is about quantity and not quality, and they don't want anything to do with it. So we're kind of now selecting for people who are going to succeed in this game. And I would argue it's not optimal for good science. So thank your biology teacher, by the way. He's very perceptive, and it's good to, one of my goals, because it's young people like yourself who are the hope. We have to reform. There is no alternative. And sometimes reform can come from above, sometimes it has to come from below. We need to approach this problem from all angles to get it fixed.
And I'm super grateful for my biology teacher. He's really pushed me to not give up on my own research, even though like I failed like so many times these past few years with like my own science.
That's what science is
Yeah.
about. That's what science is about. It's about failure, and it's about ultimately persisting to the point that you're right and maybe getting one good paper. But yeah, the pressure is, well, let's turn a failure into success. Once you start going that road, yeah, it's a slippery slope.
I mean, what advice would you have for young scientists like me aspiring to break into the field?
Well, I would argue that you should immerse yourself in the idealism of science, which is what got us to where we are as a civilization, right? Uh, so there's a lot of writing by people like Richard Feynman who talked about, the humility that a scientist must have. Um, there are books out there that talk about the idealism of science. So read those, immerse yourself in it, and regardless of how the world is, never lose that idealism, right? Because that's really what it comes down to. Is science just another institution that can be corrupted, or is it an ideal that we all have to fight for and uphold? I believe it's the latter. I believe that we are supposed to be the tribe of truth seekers and truth speakers who put that goal as our highest loyalty, regardless of personal cost and convenience.
And I think this brings us to do you think there's any way to solve this problem of current funding going towards those that prefer quantity over quality? And is there any way to fix this broken system?
Yeah, I think there's two basic approaches. One is that we could be self policing, realize that we have a problem, and reform. People have been calling for us to reform. We haven't done it. So that leads us to the second possible solution, which is if you don't police yourself, sooner or later, someone's going to come around and do it for you. And maybe that involves smashing your institutions and starting over. Right. So the last 20 years, fearful of that second alternative, I've been arguing we have to police ourselves. We have a problem. It's not just me. Many people have been arguing that. But that message failed to gain traction because it's hard to do. It's what we're supposed to do, but we don't. So now reform is going to be imposed on us, and it's not going to be pretty. And maybe, well, I know a lot of people are being hurt very badly by this, good people. But at some point, we'll have to rebuild, and hopefully, we can do it better. Change the incentives so they're more aligned with quality and reward honest, ethical actors and punish wrongdoers. And then we will have a more just system. Then we will have better science.
What part of this work changed you the most as a person and not just a scientist?
I don't think I changed. I have a saying, which is that the people who will change the world are those the world can't change. And so, I've kind of had these scientific ideals from a young age. Again, reading Richard Feynman, there's a great book called Aerosmith that goes back 100 years that talks about a scientist's quest to live an honest, ethical life and what that kind of entails. Um, the default condition is you lose your ideals. The default condition is that the world teaches you to become cynical, to become willfully blind, to look the other way. Uh, so, yeah, I don't think I've changed. And that's what's unusual. Um, Most people do. Most people give up. Most people go, oh, it's just a game and I got to play it to survive and win. No, science is an ideal and you have to fight to uphold it. And I think the greatest fight you have is the evil within yourself, right? Um, your own greed, your own biases. Like you have to overcome that before you can hope to help the world. And that's a never ending battle, both at the individual level and at the societal level. So, like it or not, you're part of the battle of good versus evil, and it starts within yourself and it extends to how your profession conducts itself.
And I hope our listeners can. I mean, I can hear it too. I mean, from this conversation that we've had today, I can see that you've never stopped fighting for the people since 20 years ago in DC, and probably even before that. Like, you've always challenged those that have been doing the wrong things, and I really admire you for that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, that's what being a scientist is all about. And sometimes you're rewarded for it, rarely. Usually you're punished for it because people don't want to hear inconvenient truth. But, without enough honest, ethical actors, you're going to live in an unjust, chaotic world where we make bad decisions and don't learn from our mistakes. And yeah, unfortunately, that's the bad news for you, is that's the world you're kind of living in right now. The good news is there's a huge opportunity for honest, ethical actors like never before. The world needs brave truth seekers, truth speakers like never before, because you can really have an impact because so few people are doing it. So that's, is the glass 90% empty or 10% full? But there's a huge opportunity for reform and to do better.
And what gives you hope after everything you've lived through?
Well, it really just is. I believe in the scientific ideal. I believe that that is the only alternative. And so, whatever the cost, I'm going to aspire to uphold that. And then it's the young people I speak to, like yourself. The younger you are, the more hope I have. When I talk to older scientists, they're so cynical and they're so part of the system. For the most part, they think I'm kind of crazy and, should maybe go and retire and keep my mouth shut. With many exceptions, by the way. There's been many amazing scientists who, despite it all, continue to fight, seek and speak the truth and do quality work. But young people really understand this story. Young people, yeah. So high school kids get it. By the time they're in graduate school, they're starting to go, well, that's a little too idealistic. And they start forgetting who they were, Yeah. So don't remember that statement. The people who will change the world are those the world can't change.
I think that's a wonderful statement. And do you have any last words to go along with that?
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, I wish you the very best with your podcast, and it's been a pleasure talking with you tonight.
You too, Dr. Edwards. Thank you so much for being a guest on H2O and Beyond today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Well, listeners, hopefully you enjoyed that episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with your coworkers and friends. If you want to stay connected with the H2O and Beyond socials, you can check out our link tree in the description below. And there'll also be a Google form if you want to be a guest or have any episode suggestions. I'll also link some, articles about Dr. Edwards' work and some of the ones he shared with me to help you guys get a better understanding of what happened in Flint and DC, as well as the role of a scientist in today's world. I'm Alex. Thank you for listening to H2O and Beyond. Stay curious and stay hydrated.